Denis Benamor. I'm the Executive Director of the Center for Sustainable Development at Columbia University here in New York. And it's my absolute pleasure to welcome you to today's event entitled Utilizing Smart Technology and Sustainable Development to Improve Livability in Growing Cities. Just a few words about my center. The Center for Sustainable Development was started in 2016 to host the economist, the American economist Jeffrey Sachs, as he stepped down from the directorship of the Earth Institute. And the mission of the Center for Sustainable Development is to develop innovative solutions to reach the Sustainable Development Goals by 2030. We have three main areas of expertise that are health, SDG 3, education, SDG 4, and gender, SDG 5. And we're trying to put a ICT component, digital component to most of our interventions. But even though we are SDG 3, 4, and 5, we like to joke that with Professor Jeffrey Sachs, we're basically all of the SDGs combined. In last year, actually, our host institute, the Earth Institute, changed its name to become the Climate School. And so we are now one of over 30 centers that are part of the Climate School at Columbia University. So speaking of climate, apparently July 4th was the hottest day ever recorded on Earth since we started recording temperatures. The week of July 3rd to July 9th was also the hottest week recorded on planet Earth since we started recording temperatures. It's very easy for us, right? We are lucky to be able to come to buildings like this with air conditioning, or homes with air conditioning. We tend to forget, maybe sometimes, that this is a luxury that a lot of people in the world don't have access to. In June, I wasn't actually in New York, but because of Canadian wildfires, the air in New York City became too toxic to breathe, and we were all recommended to stay indoors. Again, you have to have access to a safe space in order to not have the air actually be toxic to your health. So a sustainable city needs to be able to adapt to, let's say, outside conditions. And climate is one of them. Temperature is one of them. For example, pandemics. We all lived through the COVID-19 pandemic, jointly worldwide. Earthquakes, like the ones that recently hit Turkey in February of 2023. Floodings, like the ones that hit Pakistan, that covered a third of the country last year in 2022. Volcanic activity, inflation, the rise of cost of living, migrations of population. And by that I mean, during COVID, massive exodus of people outside of large cities. Now, in the post-pandemic area, massive return to people inside the cities. And of course, water and waste management problems that are associated with that. So maybe we need to be thinking about the cities we inhabit, not as the static place where we live, work, and sleep, but more like a dynamic, safe place that will help us with our health, help us with our well-being, and would actually adapt to these outside stressors. I'm pretty sure, I don't know, there's maybe 50 people that are joining us in the audience today. If I asked 20 random people, what is your concept of a smart, sustainable city? It's possible that I would get 20 different responses. And you know what? Likely, these 20 different responses are correct, and they are one piece of the puzzle. Because if you're thinking about a smart, sustainable city, what's so great about that, it is actually a cross-disciplinary topic, and you have to be thinking about it in a multidisciplinary approach in order to be addressing all of these issues, which is why I am very excited that actually all of our panelists and all of the speakers today are going to provide a very different approach, their own perspective to this complex topic. So today's meeting is organized in the sidelines of the High-Level Political Forum here in New York City, and we will be covering 4 of the 17 SDGs. SDG 7, affordable and clean energy. SDG 9, industry, innovation, and infrastructure. SDG 11, sustainable cities and communities. And SDG 7, partnerships for the SDGs. So to get us started, we will be honored to have Ambassador Neris Dockery, permanent representative of St. Kitts and Nevis to the United Nations. And in her keynote address, Ambassador Dockery will discuss urban resilience plan for Greater Basse-Terre. Following the keynote speech, we have a formidable panel discussing in more details the questions that I started to address about smart sustainable city. We have Laura Pavlovich, Acting Deputy Assistant Administrator, Bureau of Democracy, Human Rights and Governance at USAID. Mr. Alex Shi, Deputy Secretary General, International Cooperation and Development Fund, Taiwan ICDF. Susan Goranson, Director, Head of Infrastructure, European Bank for Reconstruction and Development. And online we have Sally Yozel, Director, Environmental Security at the Stimson Center. So today's event is co-organized by our host, the Taiwan Economic and Cultural Office in New York, TECO, the International Cooperation and Development Fund, ICDF, which is Taiwan's development agency, the Permanent Mission of St. Kitts and Nevis to the United Nations, and finally, Stuff United Fund. So, at this point, please join me in welcoming His Excellency Ambassador James Lee, Director General of TECO New York, for some opening remarks. Ambassador Lee is the Director General of Taipei Economic and Cultural Office and Head of UN Affairs Task Force in New York. He is a seasoned career diplomat with more than 30 years of experience in foreign service. Prior to this position, he served as Secretary General of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Deputy Representative of the Republic of China, Taiwan, to the United States. He was also posted in the Netherlands and the Czech Republic. Please, the floor is yours.
So thank you, Yanis. Ambassador Dakari, Director Susan Goranson of EVRD, Acting Deputy Assistant Administrator Laura Pavlovich of USAID, Deputy Secretary General Xi from the Taiwan ICDF, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon and welcome back to TECO New York. I think this is the first time that we have an in-person high-level political forum side events since the outbreak of the COVID-19 pandemic. First of all, I would like to thank Taiwan ICDF, the Permanent Mission of St. Kitts and Nevis to the United Nations, and the Staff United Fund for co-hosting this event with us. Without their active participation and hard work, this seminar would not be a reality. As we arrive at the halfway point of the 2030 agenda, the implementation of SDG remain inadequate. I think the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres SDG progress report, only about 12% are on track. Progression of 50% is weak or insufficient. And more than 30% have stalled or gone into reverse. With regard to the SDG 11s on the sustainable city and community, nearly 1.1 billion populations still live in slums or slum-like conditions in the urban area as of 2022. SG Guterres noted that our effort must focus on access to the convenient public transportation, waste management, and the risk reduction strategy, and all of which are significant challenges for governments around the world. While we still have a long list of challenges ahead of us, Taiwan is proud to lead the way in building a more resilient, more inclusive, safe, and sustainable cities and villages. All of the 22 cities and counties in Taiwan have released VLR report to gauge their respective progress on the sustainable implementation. Cities in Taiwan also actively participate in the carbon disclosure project. In 2022, 3 of 11 cities from the East Asia that received the highest score for their transparency and bold climate actions are located in Taiwan. Furthermore, Taiwan is willing to share its experience and best practice with the rest of the world. We have been increasing our ODA budget and working closely with partner countries on topics such as climate adaptation, mitigation, as well as urban resilience. We also set up a fund with the EBRD to provide concessional finance for projects on LED street light, e-bus, for the smart meters, and biogas recovery. So to achieve SDGs, Taiwan can help, and Taiwan is helping. And I'm sure that you will learn more smart solution from our esteemed panelists here today. On that note, thank you again to you all for joining us, and I hope you will be inspired by today's fruitful discussion. And thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Ambassador Lee, first of all, for your leadership and for the work that the TECO office is doing in really this pursuit of reaching the SDGs by 2030. You said it, we keep saying it, Taiwan can help with reaching the SDGs. And thank you also for reminding us the examples of how Taiwan is influencing the topic that we are talking about today, which are smart, sustainable cities. We'll have an opportunity to hear a little bit more about Taiwan and sustainable cities during the panel session. So at this point, it's my absolute pleasure to welcome Ambassador Neris Dockery, Permanent Representative of St. Kitts and Nevis to the United Nations. Ambassador Dockery held several positions in the St. Kitts and Nevis Labour Party, including General Secretary and Chief Executive Officer beginning in March 2022, and Public Relations Officer and Director of International Affairs from 2018 to 2020. From 2021 to 2022, she was a financial advisor of Sagicor Life Incorporated from Eastern Caribbean. In addition, Ambassador Dockery was Special Assistant Office of the Director General Organization of the Eastern Caribbean States between 2011 and 2013. She is the Executive Director and owner of Finesse Consulting Services, established in 2020. Would you please join me on stage? Thank you so much.
Good afternoon, everyone. On this bright and beautiful day, not too hot. Please allow me to adopt the established protocol. And again, to say a very pleasant good afternoon to all of you who have taken time from your very busy schedules to attend this event today. It is always an honor to be amongst friends and esteemed colleagues. I would like to particularly thank my co-host, Ambassador James Lee, and the dynamic team of the Taipei Economic and Cultural Office for organizing this event. And I highly commend you, Ambassador Lee, for the personal interest and drive that you have demonstrated in making today possible, and also for putting your confidence in me. As one of the youngest and newest additions to the UN PR Corps, I think that our theme for today, utilizing smart technology and sustainable development to improve livability in growing cities, is very timely and important one. Since the opening of the high-level political forum on Monday, and most especially after the publication of the United Nations Secretary General's latest SDG progress report, we are told that at this midpoint mark, global progress on the implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals Agenda 2030 is gravely in peril. To put it even more starkly, the promise made in 2015 to leave no one behind, which is the defining principle informing the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, is gravely in peril. The UN Secretary General, His Excellency Antonio Guterres, has issued the warning that, and I quote, "The Sustainable Development Goals are disappearing in the rear view mirror, as is the hope and right of current and future generations. A fundamental shift is needed in commitment, solidarity, financing, and action to put the world on a better path, and it is needed now." These words could not be more sobering, especially if you were born on a small island developing state of just 54,000 people, as I am, with high levels of vulnerability to exogenous shocks, and where the ravages of the impacts of climate change pose an existential threat. This is not some distant possibility or some hyperbolic doomsday scenario aimed at fear-mongering. For us in St. Kitts and Nevis, and indeed the wider Caribbean and all small and island states worldwide, the impacts of climate change pose a very clear and present danger. For us in the Caribbean, the fallout of the COVID-19 pandemic and the triple crises of climate change, biodiversity loss, and pollution are having a devastating and lasting impact. This has been amplified by Russia's invasion of the Ukraine, which has driven increases in the prices of food and energy and in the cost of access to finance, which has created a global cost of living crisis affecting billions around the world. So when we speak of sustainable development and the livability in our cities, we do not just speak of the danger and threats posed to the hard bricks and mortar of buildings, houses, and public infrastructure, and their ability to withstand the inundation of heat, wind, and water. We speak, as our host said, we speak even more so to the impact on the ability of the people within each community, each institution, each business to live, to thrive, adapt, and grow, no matter what kinds of chronic stresses and acute shocks they experience. This is the definition of resilience and the imperative of resilience building that informs St. Kitts and Nevis's vision to become a model sustainable island state by 2040. We dare to say that we are small enough. This is the definition that informs our urban resilience plan for the Greater Bastille. This is the definition that causes us to accept and acknowledge that all of the Sustainable Development Goals are interlinked, whether we speak of our goals on ending poverty and hunger, achieving good health and well-being, education, gender equality, clean energy, climate action, good governance, partnerships, or creating sustainable cities and communities. One goal cannot be achieved without the success of another. Sustainable development cannot be allowed to become a zero-sum game. It must be holistic. It must represent the commitment by all for the mutual benefit of all. Failure to make progress would mean that inequality will continue to deepen and increase the risk, as the SDG said in his report, of a fragmented two-speed world, both within and between and among countries. The alarm has been sounded loud and clear. The time for action is now, and I believe that all who are present here today are willing to act, are ready to act, and to become part of the solution. We are all gathered here knowing that SDG 11, creating sustainable cities and communities, is cross-cutting and a foundation to realizing 63% of all of the other SDGs. We understand and agree that the implementation of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development will be won or lost in our cities. Achieving SDG 11 is also a necessary means for accelerating the recovery from the negative socioeconomic impact of the coronavirus disease, COVID-19. This is the premise that led the General Assembly to adopt the Sustainable Development Goal 11 to make cities and human settlements inclusive, safe, resilient, and sustainable, and the reason behind the introduction of the necessity for localization for which the voluntary local reviews, as referred to by Ambassador Lee, were also created to track, monitor, and assess the progress and success of cities and communities. At its core, SDG 11 sets benchmarks for urban development policies and practices that facilitate access to adequate housing, basic services, energy, public transportation, and open spaces for everyone, everywhere. This goal is achieved when member states and city managers develop policies, embrace integrated planning, and develop investment budgets alongside stakeholders in a way that offers opportunities for all. As such, the day-to-day lived experiences, the livability of the world's urban dwellers, which refers to 4.4 billion people, depend on the realization of SDG 11. At this midway mark, we are told that the promise of SDG 11 is also in peril. By 2030, we will not meet most SDG targets without major shifts in urban policy and investments in local government. The consequences of not achieving SDG 11 in particular are immense. When urban challenges are left unaddressed, they can escalate into global threats that affect all of humanity. The lack of progress towards attaining SDG 11 is bound to exacerbate global divides. The widening gap between the haves and have-nots is manifested in cities through what they call spatial fragmentation, climate-driven inequalities, and the digital divide. The lack of progress towards attaining SDG is bound to exacerbate these global divides. It is therefore urgent to prevent the disastrous effects and consequences ahead of us by changing the way we plan, manage, and govern our cities and human settlements. To avoid a collective failure and to rescue Agenda 2030, actions need to be taken now across cities and human settlements. We must work together to turn this crisis into opportunities. Today, I am here to tell you that despite the bleak forecasts and alarm bells that are being sounded, there is still hope. And the higher purpose of leaving no one behind, enshrined in the Sustainable Development Goals Agenda 2030, is still within grasp. However, in the words again of our UN Secretary General, it requires, and I quote, it requires an unprecedented effort by individual governments, a renewed sense of common purpose across the international community, and a global alliance for sustainable development goals action across business, civil society, science, young people, local authorities, and more, unquote. Today, as part of my address, I present on the Urban Resilience Plan for the Greater Bastia to demonstrate to you that if the Sustainable Development Goals are pursued with intentionality and a high level of ambition and commitment, there can indeed be success. All we have to do is start where we are. I love the words of one of the presenters in the town hall meeting that was held on Monday during the opening of the HRPF. He said, I quote, "The best way to leave no one behind is to include all people. You can only end exclusion by including everyone." In my view, there should be a monument erected at the United Nations headquarters with those simple words engraved, just to keep it all in perspective for us as member states. This principle is what lies at the core of St. Kitts and Nevis' vision to create a model sustainable island state. In St. Kitts and Nevis, we believe that people are the wealth of a nation. Our new administration firmly believes that the fundamental objective of development is to create an enabling environment for people to enjoy a long, healthy, and creative lives anchored in peace and security, who are able to thrive in strong communities, and whose livability is ensured in environmental sustainability. For those of us who may not know anything about St. Kitts and Nevis, we are a small, open, two-island country with a landmass of 270 square kilometers or 104 square miles. And with a population of a little more than 53,000, St. Kitts and Nevis is located in the Leeward Islands group of the Lesser Antillean segment of the Caribbean archipelago, which is the Eastern Caribbean. Like most other Caribbean countries, St. Kitts and Nevis is highly exposed to external shocks, global economic cycles, and natural disasters. Climate change is a grotesque specter that looms large and frightening